Hello everyone, my name is Maddie Salee, and today I'm going to share some information about PTSD and how trauma affects the brain. The purpose of this session is to help you better understand what PTSD is, why it happens, and what goes on in the brain when someone experiences trauma. So why does psychoeducation matter? Learning about PTSD and what it does can be really helpful if you have gone through something traumatic yourself or if you are trying to support someone you care about. When you understand what is actually happening in your mind and body, the symptoms can feel a lot less scary and confusing. It also helps to know that these reactions are normal, which can take away some of the shame or isolation that people sometimes feel after trauma. Understanding what is happening in your mind and body can make symptoms feel less confusing or overwhelming. So some of the things that we will cover today is what PTSD stands for, some common symptoms, and why some people end up developing PTSD after going through something traumatic. After that, I will explain who can be affected by PTSD and the different kinds of events that might cause it. Then I will go over what happens in the brain when someone experiences trauma, especially looking at certain brain areas and how the body reacts to stress. Finally, I will talk about how learning all this stuff can actually help with healing and make recovery feel more possible. I actually will also sprinkle in some of my own experiences. I have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. I've been in the military for 10 years. I do know a little bit about this from firsthand, so I will also share some of that too. So what is PTSD? PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. This is a mental health condition that can develop after someone experiences or witnesses a traumatic event. Traumatic events can include things like accidents, natural disasters, assaults, combat, or any situation where someone feels intense fear, helplessness, or horror. People with PTSD often have a few types of symptoms. One is re-experiencing the trauma, which can look like having flashbacks, nightmares, or intrusive memories that make it feel like the event is happening all over again. Another set of symptoms is avoidance, whereas a person might try to avoid reminders of the trauma, like certain places, people, or activities. PTSD can also cause changes in mood or thinking, such as feeling numb, hopeless, or losing interest in things you used to enjoy. Finally, there are symptoms of hyperarousal, which means feeling jumpy, easily startled, having trouble sleeping, or being on edge all the time or much of the time. It is important to remember that PTSD is a normal response to a very abnormal or overwhelming experience, and it is not a sign of weakness. Many people experience trauma, but PTSD develops when those experiences have a lasting impact that make daily life difficult. Who gets PTSD? PTSD can happen to anybody. It does not matter how old you are, your gender, or your background. People of all ages and walks of life can develop PTSD if they experience or witness a traumatic event. Some examples of traumatic events that might lead to PTSD include things like car accidents, natural disasters, physical or sexual assault, combat or war, serious medical incidents, or even witnessing harm happening to someone else. Sometimes people develop PTSD after a single event, but it can also happen after repeated or ongoing trauma, such as abuse or living in a dangerous environment. There are some factors that can make someone more likely to develop PTSD. These include things like having a history of previous trauma, not having a strong support system, experiencing very severe or long-lasting trauma, or already struggling with anxiety or depression. But it is important to remember that even people who seem strong or have never had mental health issues before can still develop PTSD. In short, PTSD is not a sign of weakness, and it does not mean something is wrong with the person. It is simply the mind and body's response to overwhelming stress. So why does PTSD develop? It develops when a traumatic event is so overwhelming or frightening that it goes beyond what our normal coping skills can handle. During trauma, our bodies and our brains do their best to protect us by going into survival mode. This can mean feeling intense fear, helplessness, or even feeling numb or disconnected. For some people, after the trauma is over, their brain and body stay stuck in that alert survival mode. Instead of feeling safe again, it is like their system keeps sounding the alarm, even when there is no immediate danger. This is why someone with PTSD might feel jumpy, on edge, or have vivid memories of what happened even long after the event. It is important to know that not everyone who goes through trauma will develop PTSD. Factors like the type of trauma, if it was repeated, personal history, and how much support someone has all play a role. Developing PTSD is never anyone's fault. It is simply how the brain and body respond to a very intense stress. How common is PTSD? Traumatic experiences are actually pretty common. Most people go through at least one traumatic event in their lifetime, whether it is an accident, loss, violence, or something else unexpected or overwhelming. Even though many people experience trauma, not everyone develops PTSD. For most, the initial reactions of shock or distress fade over time as they process what happened and get support from others. However, for some people, the effects last much longer and start to interfere with daily life, which is when PTSD can develop. Research shows that about 6 out of every 100 people, or roughly 6% of the population, will experience PTSD at some point in their lives. Certain groups, like military veterans or people who have gone through repeated trauma, might be at higher risk. It is important to remember that if you or someone you know is experiencing PTSD, you are not alone and help is available. I just want to say as a side note, this is actually really hard for me to talk about. So I will stumble over my words sometimes just because I'm trying to deal with that in my own personal journey. But also it is very helpful for me to understand why my brain is functioning the way it does now after trauma. So that's why I'm actually very appreciative of this topic and researching this, even though it is a little bit tough. Introduction to neurobiology of trauma. Now that we have talked about what PTSD is and how it develops, let's look at what actually happens in the brain and body during and after trauma. Trauma does not just affect our thoughts and emotions, it also changes the way our brain and nervous system work. Understanding these brain changes is really important because it helps explain why certain PTSD symptoms happen. It can also help take away some of the shame or confusion someone might feel when they realize their reactions are actually their brain's way of trying to keep them safe. Learning about the neurobiology of trauma can give us hope too. It means that the right support and treatment, the brain can recover and find new ways to cope. So in the next few slides, I'm going to explain a little bit about how trauma affects different parts of the brain, especially those involved in survival, memory, and emotions. The brain and trauma. Trauma affects several important areas of the brain that are responsible for emotions, memory, and decision making. 3 main parts of the brain are especially involved when it comes to trauma and PTSD. First is the amygdala. This part of the brain acts like an alarm system. It is always on the lookout for danger and is responsible for fear and threat detection. When you experience something traumatic, the amygdala becomes very active, which helps you react quickly to threats. Next is the hippocampus. The hippocampus helps us process and store memories. During trauma, this part of the brain can have trouble organizing memories in a clear way, which is part of why people with PTSD might have flashbacks or confusing memories. Finally, the prefrontal cortex is the next part of the brain that helps us think clearly, make decisions, and control our impulses. Trauma can make it harder for this part of the brain to work properly, so it can be difficult to calm yourself down or think things through when you're feeling triggered. Together, these brain areas help explain why trauma can affect not just how we feel, but also how we think, remember things, and react to the world around us. Also, another side note, this is a really great way of explaining how PTSD really does affect us in a very physical way. A lot of my memory is gone. I get triggered very easily. I have had severe trauma happen, and I have had very severe PTSD for many years now. So as someone coming with severe PTSD that still has to deal with it on a daily basis and has a lot of other diagnoses following because of what happened, it actually is a really good explanation of how things can evolve and also heal in the brain physically and how we can move forward. The limbic system. So the limbic system is a group of structures deep inside the brain that help control our emotions, memories, and basic survival responses. 2 of the most important parts of the limbic system are the amygdala and the hippocampus, which we just talked about. When you experience something threatening or traumatic, the limbic system goes into action. The amygdala sounds the alarm, triggering emotions like fear or anger and preparing your body to react. The hippocampus works to process what is happening and store those memories. Because the limbic system is focused on keeping us safe, it can sometimes take over and make it hard to think clearly or remember things accurately during or after trauma. This helps explain why people with PTSD might have strong emotional reactions or struggle with certain memories. The limbic system is central to how we experience or respond to trauma. Trauma in the amygdala and the hippocampus. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into what this looks like from the previous slides. The amygdala is like the brain's alarm system. When we are faced with danger, it quickly triggers the body's natural survival responses, which are often called fight, flight, or freeze. This is helpful in real emergencies because it helps us react fast or stay safe. After someone experiences trauma, especially if it's very intense or happens repeatedly, the amygdala can become overreactive. This means it stays on high alert and can react to things that are not actually dangerous, like loud noises, certain smells, or even reminders of the trauma. When the amygdala is overactive, people might feel jumpy, on edge, or easily startled, even in safe situations. This is a big reason why people with PTSD can feel like they're always on guard or have trouble relaxing. It's the brain's way of trying to protect us, even when there's no immediate threat. So on the other side, the hippocampus is the part of the brain that helps us process and organize our memories. It takes our experiences and helps us make sense of when and where things happened. During a traumatic event, the hippocampus can get overwhelmed by stress and may not work as well as usual. As a result, memories of the trauma might not get stored in an organized way. This can lead to memories that feel jumbled, incomplete, or even come back as vivid flashbacks. Sometimes people with PTSD have trouble remembering certain details of the trauma, while other pieces are incredibly clear and feel like they're happening all over again. These confusing or intrusive memories are not a sign that someone is crazy or weak. It is simply a result of how the hippocampus was affected by the traumatic experience. This helps explain why people with PTSD might have strong or unexpected memories come up, even long after the event. Trauma and the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain located right behind your forehead. It is responsible for things like thinking clearly, making decisions, planning, and controlling impulses. It also helps us manage our emotions and respond calmly to situations. When someone experiences trauma, the prefrontal cortex can become less active, especially if the amygdala is on high alert. This means it can become much harder to think things through, stay focused, or calm yourself down when you feel upset or triggered. For people with PTSD, this is why it can sometimes feel impossible to manage emotions or reactions, even if they logically know they are safe. It is not about willpower or strength, it is just the way the brain reacts to stress and trauma. Knowing this can help take away some of the self-blame and make it easier to focus on healing. How the stress response works. When we experience something scary or threatening, our body automatically activates a stress response. This is often called the fight, flight, or freeze response. Basically, our brain and body get ready to either fight the danger, run away from it, or freeze in hopes the danger will pass. This response is actually very helpful in real emergencies because it prepares us to survive. Our heart beats faster, our muscles tense up, and our senses become sharper. All these changes help us react quickly when we need to. After trauma, though, the stress response can get stuck on. Even when the person is safe, their brain and body might keep acting like they are still in that danger. This is why people with PTSD may feel anxious, jumpy, or on edge, even when there is no real threat. It is the body's way of trying to protect itself, but it can make daily life really hard at times. Lasting impacts of the trauma on the brain. Trauma can have lasting effects on the brain, especially if the trauma was repeated or happened over a long period of time. When the brain's alarm system is activated over and over, it can actually rewire how the brain's responds to stress and emotions. This is why people who have experienced trauma might feel constantly on guard, anxious, or have trouble relaxing, which is called hypervigilance. Some people may also start to feel emotionally numb or disconnected from themselves or others. This is the brain's way of trying to protect itself from feeling overwhelmed, but it can make it hard to enjoy life or connect with other people. It's also called disconnection or disassociation, it can be called, or people can say those things to try to navigate with other people what they're feeling. The good news is that even though trauma can change the brain, healing is absolutely possible. With the right support, therapy, and coping strategies, the brain can learn new ways to respond and people can find relief from these systems over time. Recovery and hope. Even though trauma can have a big impact on the brain and body, it is important to remember that healing is possible. Our brains have something called neuroplasticity, which means they can change and adapt over time. This is great news because it means that with the right treatment and support, people can recover from PTSD and trauma. There are many different types of therapy and support that have been shown to help, like trauma-focused therapy, EMDR, and mindfulness practices. Building a strong support system and practicing self-care are also important parts of recovery. Most of all, it is important to have hope. You are not alone in what you are experiencing, and things can get better. With time, patience, and the right help, it is possible to feel safer, more connected, and more in control again. To sum up what we have talked about today, PTSD is a natural response that can happen after experiencing or witnessing something very traumatic. It is not a sign of weakness, and it can affect anybody. We learn that trauma does not just impact our emotions, it also changes how our brain and body react, especially in areas responsible for memory, emotions, and decision making. This can lead to symptoms like feeling on edge, having flashbacks, or struggling with emotions and relationships. Most importantly, healing is possible. The brain can change and recover with the right support and treatment. If you or someone you know is struggling with trauma or PTSD, there is hope or feeling better and finding relief from symptoms. If you guys have any questions for me about my journey, specifically, you can always ask. I'm open. Or if you just have questions about what I talked about today, I am opening to answering those as well. Thank you for watching my presentation. And here are my references.